to tackle the education sector, specifically to expand free SHS to include private schools, to counsel double track, to conduct mean testing to determine which parents can pay for them to pay, so that some parents will pay for free SHS, to be able to increase infrastructure. You promised tertiary students that their first year fees were going to be paid, among other promises. That is exactly what the Ghanaian population, or the people, the good people of Ghana, are holding you to account and expecting that should find expression in your first budget, 2025 budget, to be presented on March 11th. They are expecting these programs and the vision you set out and you promised them, for which you received 6.3 million votes, to find expression in the budget for you to operationalize it. But if you are going to set aside those key promises, which is the embodiment of your education vision, and then you are saying, I'm putting together stakeholders, they are going to put together a policy document, and that is what I'm going to work with. That for me is a reverse. You set out boldly on your vision, and then midway, about 6 months, a year on, then you call stakeholder consultation for them to review your implementation and for them to point you in the right direction where they need to point you. We started off with free SHS. We came and said that is a policy principle and the campaign promise. We are setting it out. And then periodically we engage stakeholders. All the stakeholders they are put together. Every year from 2018, we have been engaging them. We set aside 1 week in every November. We call it National Education Week, where development partners, CSOs, locally, internationally, faith-based organizations, teacher unions, and individuals, expert professors, practitioners in the education sector, we engage all of them. They come to make their comprehensive presentations, critiquing our programs and policies from kindergarten all the way to tertiary. And so that has been going on. But that also stems from an education strategic plan, which the same stakeholders have even been told that Catholic Bishop Conference and Christian Council have indicated their displeasure, how they were excluded and not invited even to take part in this. But in our time, all of them were included in the stakeholder consultation, including about 80% of the members who are even forming their planning committee. They were all part in formulating the education strategic plan that spanned from 2018 to 2030. It's a 12-year strategic plan, broad and brilliant, benchmark with best practices across the world, touching on issues from the kindergarten all the way to tertiary. It's to become the guide, the guiding policy principle for various successive governments to also tweak it with their unique initiatives and run on. And every year. So the question I'm asking is this National Education Forum going to set aside that education strategic plan? And if not, are they going to do something new? And what new are they going to do? If it is going to be a new thing, how new and different is that new policy direction from the promises contained in the NDC manifesto? And so if they are going to come up to just show how they will operationalize the same manifesto promises, then it's going to be a waste of resources, because then we didn't need that to happen. But if it is going to be a completely new thing they are going to propose, away from ESP and away from the promises contained in President Mahama's manifesto, then people have asserted that it's going to be an avenue for President Mahama to take a U-turn, find safe haven under the guise of stakeholders to say, oh, I promised free tertiary for all first years. I promised, private school free SHS for all. I promised to cancel double track ride after I take office. But stakeholders have said that I should hold on, I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do that. Then there's going to be an excuse and an avenue to renege on his promises. So that is my view on the National Education Forum.
You say that they had made promises in the education sector, and so your expectation was that they would implement these promises, after which they would go on now to do an assessment with these stakeholders.
Very much so,
Okay, so
you have a vision. The question is, does President Mahama have a vision for education sector?
Okay,
yes or no?
All right. So
if he has, then he's expected to run on with that vision.
Yes, so
If
that,
he
that point
doesn't,
that point you have made clearly. I'm building on that point. So one of the issues that usually have been raised by some of the industry watchers or experts or analysts in general is that one of our major challenges as a people when it comes to development and implementation of policies is that we fail to engage before. Most often we engage after, when the horses have already bolted. So before implementation, is it not rather the better approach to get the input of industry players to know how effective this will be, if this will work out beautifully or otherwise or effectively, rather than implement it and come back to them afterwards? Because some of the mistakes some would say that they would make if they went ahead to implement them, some of them could be avoided with their stakeholder engagement.
So you agree with me clearly on this argument that my assertion that the timing is misplaced is correct. Because if you really are minded about stakeholders' input, then right at the time of conceiving the idea is the time that you ought to have engaged stakeholders. Before you arrive at the conclusion that I'm going to pay every first year fee and it's going to be free for every first year in tertiary institution. Before you come to boldly make a declaration that I'm going to cancel double track, I'm going to make sure that some parents are paying, I'm going to ensure that free SHS remittances for food 100% go to the schools. Before you make all these bold declarations and encapsulate them into your promises for your manifesto, that was the time that you should have engaged the stakeholders. But if you don't do so and you make those bold promises and pronouncements, it's a social contract. It becomes your vision. You set it out, and as you implement it. So did he not have a vision, and was that vision not, factoring the views of stakeholders at the time he made those pronouncements? So the timing clearly at this point is wrong. The other question is,
the question is it wrong to engage stakeholders again before ruling them out? Is there a challenge with that?
Yes, clearly there's a challenge, and the challenge here is that they are not going to. If they are going to, the outcomes are two. They are either going to keep the same thing running, or they are going to make major changes. And when they make major changes, then the conclusion of the school of thought that this is just an avenue for the president to renege on his promises is underrated. Otherwise, you set out to operationalize your vision. 6 months on, a year on, stakeholders could come in and refine and fine-tune how you have started, your policies. Because policies is a cycle. Otherwise, the major broad-based policies, the major ones that are already in place, were already contained in the education strategic plan. And for these, stakeholders have always been engaged. It's the same stakeholders who set up that education strategic plan.
Okay, so
and the same stakeholders who have been reviewing it every year, November, as far back as this November.
All right. So one of the feedback that I'm getting is that why government was hesitant? The past administration was hesitant to heed to the calls, for instance, from some stakeholders, some analysts at the time the free SHS was being rolled out, that instead of rolling it out immediately, they needed to stagger the process. And also when everything started and some of the challenges started rearing their head, some say that if there had been engagement before the rollout, many of the challenges that confronted in the early stages could have been avoided. Is that the mindset that informed this?
Challenges?
Accommodation. When it was rolled out first, one of the key challenges was accommodation. Where we had dormitories that were crowded. People had to be crammed in rooms and everything else. Classrooms, infrastructure for classrooms and everything was a challenge as well.
Dedei, it's a matter of policy principle.
Furniture.
One party thought that 830,000 students will be the only students that the current infrastructure can contain, and the rest of over 150,000 most of whom are poor, still stay home and should not have access to secondary education. That was the decision NDC took. The NPP took an alternative decision and said, everyone deserves to go. Let's find creative ways of ensuring that everyone gets in. At the start, there will be challenges, but immediately we need to be able to get the resources to build sufficient spaces. And that saw the construction of 2,500 education infrastructure within the first 3 years, so that access becomes expanded. Now, with that innovation and with that investment into expanding infrastructure, and not waiting on the NDC alternative, that let us wait. So how many years, whether 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years, progressively until whatever time the infrastructure will have will adequately accommodate students. Let us keep denying poor people access until we have enough space for them. That is very misconceived. But we took a bold decision, whether you are poor or rich, get in. We'll find a way to expand infrastructure within the first 3 years, which we did. Then we introduced double track. It's a creative way of ensuring that Wesley girls, as many as can be taken, are not denied, but they go in there. As one stream is in school, the other stream will be on vacation, and then they will have their turn without compromising on contact hours. Best practice that even the United States of America practices.
And so but the issue about contact hours has been countered by various education think tanks, and also even some of the teacher unions. They've talked about how contact hours has actually reduced with a double track process, with a double track position. We have parents. We have heard parents. You know, it's okay. It's okay for. Yes. If I could conclude, I'd be grateful. So in these situations, we've had parents whose children are direct beneficiaries of this policy, and which has been commended by many, but inherent challenges still remain. And the main concern from the parents usually has been that contact hours have reduced. In terms of quality, they have seen a dip among others. But that is a different picture policymakers like yourself see, but the beneficiaries also have their verdict.
So, be that as it may, that is why you proposed to cancel free double track. And you said that everybody is going to be in the trimester system that previously prevailed, so that they will have the kind of vacation parents prefer. So they expect you to run on with it. You have provided clear alternative. So whatever challenge that may have bedeviled free SHS, I'm not going to be on your show to deny that there was no challenge with free SHS. But whatever challenge granted that was associated with free SHS, you have so-called superior alternative. Run on with that superior alternative. That is what we hope to see it running. But if you do not have that, and you are now going to run to stakeholders to guide you, let us hope to see what the stakeholders are going to bring, and let us compare it to how different it will be from what NDC promised. Will it be a complete deviation? Well, if it is a complete deviation, we'll come back and discuss on your radio how Ghanaians have been scammed. If it is the same thing they promised that the stakeholders are going to point them in to do, it would have been a complete waste of resources, because then nothing new has been offered. So that's why I'm saying that in governance, you set out your vision before you even bring it out. That is when you engage stakeholders. When you bring it out and it's your policy and they vote for you, you run with it. Then midline, you have your evaluation and your stakeholder consultation. So that must be.
But Honorable, I'm really struggling to understand how it is a challenge to seek further opinions. I'm really struggling to appreciate it, because one of the major concerns that have come up is that most often the political class does not listen. And so if you are trying to solicit more, how is that a challenge?
Dedei, you have promised, and that based on that promise, you have been voted into power. You provided specific policy alternatives to solve those same challenges. You have repeatedly on your show have accused MPP that we didn't listen. Fine, granted we didn't listen. For which NDC that the population hopes they will listen to have obtained 6.3, you bring what you went round and listened and provided as your alternative. If you say free SHS had a problem and so you send money directly to them, it is your budget is coming. Put it in. Why set it aside and say that I'm waiting for what stakeholder will say? When is the stakeholder going to finish their work? And are they going to wait till the next budget before they start implementing the education sector promises they give? That is the question I'm asking. So it is not an argument of what is wrong with stakeholder. I'm saying that I'm not against stakeholder consultation, but because we have been doing it, the same people have been with us from 2018. Every November we set 1 week to do it, but the timing is misplaced because they have to go on with their policies as they promised. Because any attempt to run away from their promises will hold them to account.
Okay, so this is what you think should be their approach. Meanwhile, they also have a different approach to how they think they should go about it.
Entitled to their views, and they have my views will not stop them from carrying on with their stakeholder consultation. But my job as an opposition MP who means well for our country is that this is how I feel ought to be done and to be done right. Otherwise, there is going to be a waste of resources. If they are going to sit around education strategic plan, doing the same thing, we already have it. If they are going to propose new things, are those new things going to be U-turn from President Mohammed's promises? Then the critics will come on.
Is that the concern you have, that this forum will be used as a point or as a reference to back down on some of the promises made? Is that your concern?
It's a legitimate concern, and that is the point I forcefully made. And if that is not going to be the case, but the same thing he promised is what the stakeholders are going to point out for him to personalize, then the other concern that then they didn't really need stakeholder consultation, and that is a complete waste of resources, will also arise. So whichever way you look at it, there is tenable the argument I'm putting forth. However, they can carry on with it. No one is stopping them. We'll come back to discuss the outcome of their consultation. And at that point, if you recall the points we made, you find that you would have exonerated.
And one more thing. Yesterday there was the announcement that PTAs are set to be reintroduced. The Parent-Teacher Association, the Education Minister, Haruna Idrisu, made those pronouncements yesterday. What do you make of that as well?
Nobody abolished PTA. Nobody abolished the involvement of parents in the running of schools and to take interest in the outcomes of their learners. What we did was abolishing PTA levies. PTA levies were compulsory, and at some point, if you had fulfilled all other requirements and you are even in your final exam, but you owe PTA, students had to be sacked, and all their 3-year struggle, just gone to waste. And we said that we don't want that burden to be on parents. It is an association. It is a voluntary. People join associations voluntarily. If there's any contribution they ought to get, it ought to be voluntary. We scrapped the compulsory PT levy. Government took that on and put it into the recurrent expenditure that periodically were disbursed to schools and sent it, taking that burden off parents. Then we created what we call Parent Association. So we called it Parent Association, and from 2017 to 2024, anyone who called the school, they do it. However, periodically, they were engaging the school authority, and that never stopped. So if NEC now says they are bringing back PTA, it's not like PTA was banned. So engagement were not banned. Are they bringing back the levy? Is that what they are bringing back? If they are not bringing back the compulsory levy, and it is the engagement between teachers and parents, that was never stopped.
The argument that has come up forcefully is that after the levies were banned and all that, beyond that, the role of the PTA significantly diminished under your administration, because back then the PTA had quite a say when it comes to discipline, policy, as well as other issues relating to the school. But because of the limiting or the limiting role that the government gave the PTA, they barely could make any input.
Which, by calling that parent association, was it the teachers' engagement that got diminished, or the parents' engagement that got diminished? Which particular one got suffered or was lower? There were teachers who were so heavily involved in the running of schools. Parents were so heavily involved. The only thing that stopped was the compulsory levy, because that compulsory levy was charged. Everybody was charged, and then they had their own way of using it to administer to certain challenges in the school. And we said that has been taken away. When you take that away, you are rather freeing the burden on parents. You are not rather taking away their powers. You don't take away their say. We did never ban their terminal or regular or semester meetings they held in schools. Call Wesley Girls, call Achimota, call Precept, call Asiman Secondary School, call the various schools and ask them, did they stop meeting parents? And if they did not stop, what changed? The only thing that changed was the compulsory levy they were asked to pay.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much for your time. We are grateful that you were able to speak to us.
Thank you, Dedei.
You had to speak to Reverend Intim Fojo. He's a former Deputy Education Minister. You're still listening to the Morning Star here on Star 103.5 FM. We will remain on issues relating to the forum a while longer. We will be speaking to the chairman of the committee to get some understanding on this issue. We've heard from Reverend Intim Fojo. He believes that this is a complete waste of time, if I'm capturing it correctly, and that it is going to serve as an avenue for the NDC to go back on some of its promises, and that if you have a policy or a vision for education sector which you made public ahead of the elections, the expectation is that you go ahead and roll out immediately without having any further engagements. Rather, if you should have any engagements, it should be after the implementation of these policies. And it reminds me very much of a submission that Bright Simmons made over the weekend, where he says that in our side of town, our leaders are usually, there are two forms of engagement. Usually it's either they would engage you before or they will engage you after. And most often the decision is already made, is rolled out, and then you are brought on board to get your buy-in after it has been rolled out already. Whereas there are others also that opt to engage you prior to the rollout. Each of them, they say, have their advantages and disadvantages, and I'm sure you would have a fair idea of which has a good idea, is a good idea or otherwise, or has benefits or otherwise. We'll be speaking to Professor George Kweku Toku Ojuro. He is a chairman of the National Education Forum Committee. The work is beginning today. The forum is beginning today in the Volta Regional Capital Hall. It's a Morning Star here on Star 103.5 FM. Chairman of the National Education Forum Committee. Good morning to you, sir. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Morning Star.
Good morning to you and greetings to your audience.
Great. And so the forum takes off today, correct?
Yes, correct.
And what form is it going to take? What exactly is going to happen at this forum?
Thank you very much. Today the forum will be launched by His Excellency John Dramani Mahama by 11 o'clock. And the launch is based on the broad theme that we have for the forum, which is transforming education for a sustainable future. transforming education for a sustainable future. And we have 5 key pillars around which, thematic areas around which stakeholders will be engaged. We'll be looking at infrastructure. We'll be looking at educational quality provision. We'll be looking at regulation, accountability, and governance. We'll be looking at education financing. And then last, we'll be looking at research and data because we think evidence is very key in decision making. We expect to get 300 people, stakeholders at the launch, which will be chaired by Tettey Afede. And we have 2 key keynote speakers, one from Monash University in Australia, and the other one from the Open University from the UK. They are both Ghanaian educationists living in these 2 countries, so we want their professional perspective on the team. So today we have 2 components at launch, after which we'll break into breakout sessions to interrogate the 5 key pillars that we have. So that's what we have. Then in addition to this, we have zonal engagement.
Prof, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So kindly run us through the 5 key pillars one more time, please.
Yeah, we have infrastructure. The pillar 1 is infrastructure. Can you hear me? There's background. Yeah.
I can hear you, sir.
It's infrastructure. And here we are looking at physical infrastructure and then ICT infrastructure. We know that there are challenges with infrastructure, both physical and technology. So stakeholders will have to engage in how best we can improve infrastructure to support learning in our schools. Then after that, we are looking at educational policy, educational quality provision. We know that we look at the SDG 4. It talks about access linked to quality. So how can we improve quality in our schools? That is key for stakeholders to engage. Then regulation, accountability, and governance. If our school system or educational institutions are not well regulated, if accountability is not ensured, if governance is not efficient to allow systems to operate, then we cannot be in a position of ensuring quality education. So that is key for stakeholders to engage. Then the pivot around which all these evolve is financing. So that is also one aspect that we have stakeholders run from different angles to interrogate, including students, teachers, CEOs, parents, and many others. Then the last one I mentioned, pillar 5, is research and data, because we think evidence is very critical. So these are the 5 pillars or thematic areas around which the discourse will revolve.
Okay, so infrastructure, regulation, financing, research, and data. Which one am I missing?
You are missing. You talked about financing. You talked about infrastructure. Yeah, you captured all.
Infrastructure, regulation,
financing. Financing.
Yes.
Research.
Yes.
Research.
Okay.
And quality.
Quality. Okay. Okay. Yeah, but just before we proceed further, there is a press statement from the Ghana Catholic Bishops Conference and the Christian Council of Ghana. They complaining about being excluded from this forum. Why did that happen?
No. I've spoken to. I think there must be a communication gap because as the committee, we cannot talk about education in this country without reference to the Christian Council or the Bishops Conference or the religious bodies. So I think it's a communication gap, and we are addressing that. It's unfortunately. They were key among the stakeholders we actually identified. So we are addressing that.
So is there a rep there, or they did not get the message?
Once they are complaining, then it means that the message did not get. So that's what I mean by it's communication issue.
Okay.
And so we are addressing that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we've identified the 5 thematic areas that you'd be looking at. So in terms of the stakeholders, will they all be presenting papers?
No. The model we have adopted is that there are few people who will be presenting papers, and the others will be engaging. So we have panel sessions, breakout sessions where people will be engaging with the thematic areas. At the zonal level, we have divided the country into 3 zones. So we can get a local people within the localities to contribute to that. We have facilitators who will initiate and moderate the discussion to gauge the views of others. So it's a mixture of presentation and engagement. Yeah.
Okay. And so at the end of the day, will there be a policy paper?
Yes, at the end of the day, the engagement will end with a validation forum in Accra at UPSA. And at that validation forum, we will present key issues emerging from the stakeholder engagement for other stakeholders to validate. And here, because the issue will have financial implications, development partners will play a very key role in the validation. But after the validation, we will tease out the policy issues emerging, and that will provide us a framework for implementation.
Okay. And so one concern that has been raised, for instance, by the former deputy education minister is that this forum need not to have happened because the NDC already had a vision when it comes to the education sector. So the expectation is that they will go ahead and roll out these policies or this vision, and rather after some time they would come back to the stakeholders to engage them for an assessment. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, thank you very much. You see, when we find it difficult to draw lines between politics and governance, then this type of thinking comes up. When you have a manifesto, you come out with a frame, this is what I want to do. You need the buy-in of people in terms of its implementation. And my sister, we consider the 3 SHS. When the NPP came out with the 3 SHS idea, which is very laudable, if they had engaged in a national implementation discourse and heeded the caution that notable people within this country, including their own some NPP people gave, we wouldn't have plunged ourselves into the challenges that we have encountered with the 3 SHS implementation, particularly in terms of funding. We do not want to make that mistake. The NDC doesn't want to make that mistake. So what the NDC is doing through this stakeholder engagement is to first get a buy-in of stakeholders in terms of implementation. So the big question is, what is the current state of education? What has the NDC proposed addressing or using to improve the current state? What gaps are there, and how do stakeholders satisfy those gaps? What can be done to address those gaps? And doing this, we need stakeholder buy-in. We need stakeholder engagement. We need the voice of parents. We need the voice of students. We need the voice of CSU. We need the voice of teachers. So anyone who will come out to say that the policy, the stakeholder engagement is needless and waste of time doesn't understand what policy making and policy implementation is. He doesn't appreciate the need for stakeholder buy-in in such policies. If NDC is thinking just political, then NDC will just go on and say that this is what we said and so we are implementing. Whether the public likes it or not, we are implementing. But because the NDC respects the opinion of people, because the NDC respects the principle of collective ownership, because the NDC respects the principle of belongingness, that is what has actually led to trigger this national forum. So please, I don't think that the former deputy minister is thinking national. He's thinking party. If he thinks party, then his argument may hold. But we are not thinking party. We are thinking the nation.
All right, Prof. Thank you so much for speaking to us. We're grateful for your time.
Thank you too very much. Yeah.
All right, then. All the best for the forum as well. You had to speak to Professor George Toku. We spoke to him in connection with the upcoming National Education Forum. It's taking place today in the Volta Regional Capital Hall. Professor George Kwekutoku Ojo, the chairman of the National Education Forum. It's the Morning Star here on Star 103.5 FM.